friends and fellow travelers, and welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach. And today we're going to be talking about what I think is a really important topic. It's called leadership. Now, everybody knows what leadership is. Everybody understands the concepts, and everybody recognizes it when they see it. And I'm sure we've all witnessed all kinds of different leadership styles, ranging from tyrannical dictator all the way down to something more appealing, I think, the collaborative servant leader. In fact, you may look around and decide that there's some of that kind of, well, one kind or the other leadership right here in our own country. And what do we do about it? What do we do about it? How do we change that leadership? How do we improve leadership in this world? So I believe, and I think Chris believes this too, that we all possess the qualities and the capabilities for leadership, even if we haven't necessarily defined, developed, or refined the skills necessary to bring that leadership into the world. But if you have a message to deliver, if you are doing any kind of work in the wellness field, then by definition, you are a leader because you're bringing your essence and your truth and your wisdom to the world. So that's a kind of leadership too. So my guest for today is a man who has gone through some pretty amazing adventures in his life and has developed his own leadership skills to the point where he now teaches others to do the same, but in a very special way. He's a speaker, author, business coach, and e-learning expert who is committed to helping other authors, teachers, entrepreneurs, and change agents light up the world with their message. He's the creator of an organization called the Launch Academy, which is a live online training program that teaches participants how to successfully launch transformative and lucrative online courses and grow their global learning community. I'm also very proud to say that he is a personal friend and associate with a deep passion in his heart that is truly inspiring. Please join me in welcoming a true leader in the world, Chris Kyle.
Oh, Thank you, David.
Chris. It's been a long time. Thank you so much for joining me. How's it going?
It's good. Great to be here. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I love it. I love your thoughts and insights on leadership. So I'm happy to dive into this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's well, you've been on this show a few times, and it's always awesome. You and I, we get this banter going that I absolutely love it, and I think our audience is going to love it too. So I know you've been really busy over the last year and a half or so doing a master's degree in education in relation to this whole topic of leadership. Now you're focusing on what we call the natural leader, and what you really mean to say is the leader who works in nature and brings the nature part into leadership. You want to tell us a little bit about that and what that's all about?
Yeah, I mean, you actually hit half of it. I would say it's two sides of two pieces. One is what you're saying is this quality of natural, that I already have what I need to be a leader in the world and in my community, in my family, in my own life. Remember, it's just leading in our own lives too sometimes. It's not necessarily leading people. So there is this quality of what you just said, is this natural sense of when I find me, when I find my authentic me, when I open myself to what are my natural gifts, my natural capacities, who am I naturally in the world, not some kind of image, not some artificial image, then I'm able to actually bring more of my gift, more of me forward into creating the change that we want to see in the world, that you want to see in the world, that I'd like to see in the world. So there is that one. The other side of the coin is thinking about nature and the natural world, this whole planet, call it the living system that is Earth, is that we can learn from and be inspired by and build capacities by looking out into nature as our teacher. Right? So we obviously have lots of books around leadership, there's a lot of gurus around leadership, a lot of teachers around leadership. That's all fine. That's all wonderful. But I would say that the most important mentor, the most important teacher, the most important place to look for helping to develop me and my capacities is the natural world. And not only for the lessons that we can pull from the natural world, but also just by being transformed, by spending more time really in deep connection with the earth and with nature.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. And so not only are you talking about drawing from nature, but as we become more connected with nature, then we also become, I think, more aware of some of the problems and so forth that we're creating. And it helps us then to be more maybe proactive in our dealings with helping nature to thrive, rather than doing all the negative stuff that we've been doing for so long.
Yeah, and we can also pull lessons. This is where the fields that I'm looking at and studying are living systems theory. You might have heard of the field of biomimicry. That's really big in the design world, of like looking to nature to design things for human design. And so when we start pulling on some of those, like drawing on living systems theory, on biomimicry, or other things, regenerative cultures, regenerative systems, we start to see things that can actually inform a new way of thinking, David. So this is what's really powerful is, one thing which I think we could all keep learning more about is that in nature, everything is interdependent. It's built on interdependence. And yet our culture and our way of being is continuing to be building this idea of separation, isolation, and siloing. This is my life. This is my family. Don't screw with me. I'm going to get all these guns and up on my, hill up in the somewhere and just defend my territory, defend my world, defend my family. And it's a kind of a me versus they, right? We're seeing this in our own culture in the United States and other parts of the world, which is there's this massive separation. It's not interdependent. It's dependence here and independence here and independence there, and then the battle between people, between cultures. And that actually, more and more of that has to shift if we're going to move out of some of the challenges that we're facing on our planet right now. We've got to be moving into more of a way of thinking of interdependence. And nature and how it works in ecosystems and others is always interdependent with feedback loops. How can the whole system thrive, not just parts of the system? If parts of the system are focused just on its own thriving, the whole system won't thrive. And if there's a focus on the whole system thriving and giving and exchanging and collaborating, all these words we're going to use, then we're actually in a place where more thriving can happen rather than more destruction. And so that's really the key. And then there's other lessons in nature that we pull out. So it's not just being in nature, it's also using the lessons from nature too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I totally agree with you. This concept of interdependence. Interdependence isn't a word I use all that often. I think it's a great word though, and I'm glad you brought it back to my awareness. I think it's something that I should be thinking about a lot more. I think of inclusion. That's one word that I use a lot. Collaboration is another word I use a lot. And the notion that separation is a complete illusion. It's really, there is no separation. That's just a construct of our ego minds. And when we understand that and when we deconstruct that illusion, we begin to feel literally our connection with everyone and everything else in the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know I certainly feel that a great deal, being in connection with people in the heart space, and also just when I'm by myself out in nature, out walking my dog, for example, I can feel that energy flow.
Yeah,
so it really is there. It's a great
and
word.
You bring a great point about being out in nature and feel the flow and feeling that nature can help you come back into an awareness of that connection rather than separation. And it can be through a spiritual path, it can be through meditation, but for many people, it's about reconnecting to the whole world, everything, right? Out with the trees and listening to the birds and feeling that presence. One of the things that, just to flip this, is that part of the challenge that I think are facing in the world is that story of separation is continuing to create a lot of the challenges and the issues that we face in our culture. Is that story that we're separate and disconnected from each other, and that I have mine, you have yours. And when we talk about leadership, and leadership is such a broad topic to talk about, but when we think about ourselves leading in our own lives, leading from this new place, this new story, then we need to inhabit, each of us individually and then collectively need to inhabit a new story. And I think the new story is actually an old story, right? So that's the mind screw there, is that the new story is really an old story, but with some sense of evolution. Like, here we are now in our culture. The story that we're living in is not working. I think most people see that out in the world, it's not working. So how do we change that story? And I believe part of the changing the story is coming back to the original teacher and mentor and coach, which is Mother Nature, Gaia, Earth, whatever.
Spirit, universe.
Yeah. David, it's 4 billion years this Earth has been learning and growing and evolving. And it's learning. It's like that's the greatest experiment and research department anywhere on the planet. So our research department for us as human beings is to go back and look at this 4 billion years of amazing, evolution and planetary shift and change that we can begin to come back into relationship with. So what I say, and what a lot of my friends in kind of this field of really regenerative cultures, living systems frame, is that we have, as human beings, we've broke our relationship with nature, with the natural world, with Mother Earth, with Gaia. Even me saying nature and human is not correct, meaning it's a disconnect there. It's really, we are part, as Bill Plotkin would say, there's the human world and then the more than human world, right? He doesn't distinguish. There's nature and there's human beings. It's like we're all part of the living system, and we've forgotten, or we've broken it, or we have a new story that says man is in dominion over nature. Science is king or emperor, whatever you want to say. And if we can't prove it in this way or that way, then it doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. And our relationship is more on the resource of the planet, that we are in dominion over this resource. And that's a fallacy that's really only been around for maybe 300 or 400, 500 years in terms of the thinking, the human cultural thinking, the modern world. And it's a problem, David, and it needs to be shifted, dismantled. It's an old paradigm that's on its way out, but there's a lot of the death throes of the old paradigm, David. That's, as somebody's dying, it's like the rigor mortis and And
well, I've been reading a lot by David Hawkins recently, and I don't know if you've read any of his stuff.
I have.
This from a very spiritual perspective. And what you're describing, I think, is the way David Hawkins would describe that is it would be the ego mind, the collective ego mind that is in the death throes, because it realizes it can't continue to exist in this way. The other thing I want to say is 4 billion years is just the physical aspect of our universe that we know, that we're familiar with.
Right.
If you take the spiritual, the time is limitless. It's boundless, going backwards or forwards, but of course, science doesn't want to recognize spirituality because science is incapable of proving spirituality. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with science. I think science is great, but we have to remember that science is part of the process that creates the separation in the first place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to get back to this sense of union and connection and oneness, we have to transcend science. Use science as a tool for which it is designed, but don't let it limit us in the way we think. That's how I think we need to.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And if you bring that back to my own development as an individual and my own development as a leader in my own life or in my business or in my community, it is that. It is about coming back to what is it that's most true. This is where there is that confluence of both embodied, kind of an embodied experience that I'm here in a body on this planet, and I'm also transcendent to that body, that I'm a spirit that's working through a body too, just like you're saying. And you said so beautifully, this pulls a little bit from integral theory, is it still transcend and include, meaning that when I start rejecting old ways of things, I'm still in a tension of that's bad and this is good versus, oh, we're evolving. And so it's a transcending, but including. So science is part of, and all the scientific revolution and all that is part of our cultural, milieu now. It's all part of who we are as human beings on this planet. And yet we don't stop here, right? That's where most people fall in, that we're at the pinnacle of our creative capability as human beings, and say, no, we're not.
We're just at the infancy, I think.
Right. There's so much more to unfold.
Right.
We don't know. Sometimes we don't know. We got to be willing to be in there. I don't know what I don't know, which is an incredible place for a leader, whether that leader is leading people or in their own life or leading a business or leading a community or leading a country, is to become fully engaged and present with what's in the space, and not necessarily be saying it has to look like this, or, we're going to create this, that there's a willingness of the leader to be in the I don't know space and in the co-creative space. and being willing to look at what is the essential purpose of our group coming together, this community, this organization, this group. Do we have an intention and a purpose that we're serving that's much broader than a particular goal or destination or whatever? And that's what can begin to, if the story starts to change, that purpose of individual leaders and that purpose of an organization will start to shift for more thriving, for more of the whole living system is going to be working, that it works for everybody, right, David? I mean, that's the thing. And that's a hard one with 7 billion people on the planet, to think of how do we keep thinking of the whole system needs to thrive and certain, than just a portion of it. And this is where social justice comes into play. It can't just be a portion of the culture that gets everything and then everybody else gets, nothing. So how can the whole system thrive? And leaders need to be attuned to the whole system, the whole living system.
Yeah. So you mentioned a key word here that I just want to bring back into awareness, and that's the word purpose. Yeah. Now, I know that over the last few years, actually probably since I've known you in 2000, I think I met you in 2003, 2004, somewhere in that time frame, you've been very focused on the whole notion of purpose and helping people, men in particular, to create a life that's purpose driven. And I know that's really important to you, and I know you haven't in any way abandoned that. And I see how much passion you have right now. So I'm kind of curious about how you decided to move, or maybe I'm not move away from purpose, but move more towards the leadership side of things and bring that. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, thank you, David. I would say simply that it's more the way I look at the transition of my work is more holistic. So when I'm talking about leadership, and that's leading in life, leading in your own life, leading in community, leading in organization at all levels, right? So this isn't just a company leader, right? I'm talking about all aspects of leadership. For me, that opens up a door where purpose is one fundamental part of a much bigger context, where I'm giving my gift in a way that is actually having, hopefully, increasing impact, in the people and the world around me. So my lens is opened up from this focus on purpose, which is awesome, to now a focus on the individual and the collective development. And for now, the best word to use to kind of talk in that realm of taking your seat, so to speak, right? Taking your seat as somebody who has gifts to give and a message to bring and creativity to bring. The best word we have right now is leadership. We can use words like personal development and organizational development, but it doesn't hit the same tone for me as saying, you are a leader, David. You're a leader in your own way. How do you want to lead more powerfully going forward? How do you want to get your message more fully out there? Where does your purpose meet the world, David? That's where I'm looking more now, is how can you create the positive change that you'd like to see? And hopefully the story changes enough, our collective story is changing, that the idea of what you see as positive change or good is about the whole system thriving, right? Not just that the positive good is I made more money and and that's all fine, but to think up beyond self, beyond ego self, beyond the small self, beyond just what I get, what my family gets, into how can I contribute to the whole. So that's where now leadership and sort of individual and collective development meet. Purpose is just one important piece of that now. Bigger context. And it's me asking this too, is where am I choosing to lead in my life to solve some of the biggest challenges on our planet today, to help change this human story so we don't keep perpetuating on the planet and each other, all our stuff, like you've talked about this before, all our ego shit, that we play out on other people, and all of our wounding that we play out on people, all our shadows we play out on people. So I would say all this, that to come all the way full circle is, leadership is just a marker for my willingness to grow, right? It's a marker for your willingness to grow and expand and not shrink from what the world is bringing to us. That's why the leadership word works really well. And I think for me, the last thing I'll say here around this is that it's time, David, it's really time for clear, passionate, purposeful people to really step up to lead in their own communities, in the world, to create change that moves this story to what's the next evolution for us as human beings. Because I can tell you, when I look out in the world, it's not working right now. And we need a whole new wave of millions and millions of leaders that are saying, there is a better way, a different way, there's a way to thrive, and I want to be a part of that and play the part of that. And I think that's happening. That's the wave that's happening, David. But I don't think it's hit a tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. You know, we're a ways from a tipping point of the paradigm story really shifting across the planet. But I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that paradigm shift.
Yeah. That's a beautiful explanation of how you're transitioning by bringing the purpose and the passion into leadership. And I think that's one of the key points that we wanted to talk about anyway. I think if I am going to lead, I really do have to have a clear sense of purpose for my life.
Yes.
I have to understand why I'm here, what I'm here to do, and all the rest of that. And as you and I have discussed before on previous episodes, I can't know that until I really know who I am.
Yes.
In other words, my purpose is a clear reflection of who I am as a spiritual being having a physical experience.
Yeah.
And so
yep.
The question then becomes, how do I get clear on my purpose so that I can be inspired and motivated to lead? That's really, I think, the big question.
Yeah, and I think, and I like actually that question. I don't know if I think it makes sense to dive into that like a purpose conversation now, but I will tell you something that's close to that, which is the knowing of myself, right? You said that. It says really, really deeply knowing myself, being present with myself can open the door for me to have clarity, mental clarity of, oh yeah, this is my purpose, or full body clarity of this is my purpose. What I'd like to just go into, to your point there, is what is a way what is one way when we look through the lens of leadership where I might be actually managing organization, managing people, even my own company or other people in my organization, or even just community leadership, right? Grassroots leadership. You know, some of that purpose is some of it's inside of me, but also it's me looking out and realizing what this organization is doing or what we can do as an organization also feels very purposeful. I'm aligned with it, but it's a different it's not just my purpose fully, out into this organization. So what I want to talk about that I think goes to this is, how do I develop myself as a leader, as a more potent leader? Let's just say that there is some work toward purpose, like uncovering what that is. But here's what I've been working on, and that's really going to be at the core of my thesis for my master's program. And that is basically a practice-oriented approach to how I develop myself and I develop myself as a leader for me to be more impactful within this new paradigm story that is emerging, which is that the whole living system needs to be thriving and that we as human beings need to be attentive to it. So how do we do that? And that living system, so an organization, David, is a living system. It's just a smaller living system. But in our current culture and our current hierarchies, we look at an organization as a static thing. It's a thing. Yeah, and people are little automaton. Truly, it's still this way, that people are all these little pieces in this thing that we're trying to move through space, rather than seeing it as an evolutionary, flowing, dynamic living system with feedback loops, people coming and going all the time. We know that when we say it, but do we really believe it and hold it in our thinking and our thought that it's a living system? Right. And so if I hold it that way, then here's what I'm offering is I'm building a map, what I call, it's a 4-quadrant map. You'll be surprised to hear that, 4 quadrants. Sounds familiar. No. But it's a map. It's basically a human developmental map that maps back to nature, to this living system that is the planet, and then brings it back into connection to me. And to others around me. And so what I've noticed is that it's really bringing, you're going to love this, it's bringing some of the spiritual aspects, unhooked from religiosity, bringing in some of the classic human development stuff that's been happening over the last 50 years. And it's even bringing in this idea of living systems theory and biomimicry. And so why don't I just give an outline of the four practices, if you will, and then we can ask them some questions. So I decided to kind of look at what's one of the simplest maps of the natural world that humans have been aware of. And I thought, well, how about the elements, right? How about the 4 elements? Keep this simple. And so, I built
fire and water. Yep.
You got it. So water, air, fire, and earth. And so the 4-quadrant model is looking at each of these directions as more of a practice with energies and ideas and ways of thinking that are in each of these quadrants. So when we look at the first quadrant, which is the quadrant of earth, it's really about that practice, which I call the practice of grounding and being in presence and looking out. So the practice is looking out into the world. So looking out into the world means, and this is a practice, it means that I am looking out without judgment, trying to stay neutral in my own script and story to see what's in the space. And so when it's in nature, and when we're in nature, we are looking out at a sunset, we're looking at a vista, we're looking through the trees in the forest. And what happens when I do that is I get more present. I find myself more grounded, and I'm able to notice the little things, right? David, do you notice that? The little bird that falls on the branch, the breeze that just kind of comes across your face, that kind of presencing, which aligns with lots of spiritual disciplines, is using the natural world and using the discipline of looking out without trying to come back into what do I think, oh, that sucks. I hate that kind of bird. Whatever, trying to be as present as possible. The way that plays out then, if you practice that in nature, you'll find, it's actually easier to do out here on a walk or in a park than in my house or in the distractions of my phone or whatever. And then where that hits in an organization is if you're in a room with a team, you're looking out and you're reading the space. This is what we know from our men's weekends and all that. I'm not being in my own judgment vehicle, and I'm watching what's happening in the space, noticing the energy, noticing the flow, noticing what people are saying or not saying, and I'm noticing the quality of the space. And people like Peter Senge and Arthur Sharma have written a lot about presencing in leadership. So this is a part of that. It comes from that lineage, is if I notice what's in the space, I can be more effective. Right. And so that's earth. That's one. That's the earth element. That's looking out. That's understanding what's happening out in the space. The other way now, the other practice is going in. You're going to love this. So it's looking in. So practice 1 is looking out. Practice 2 is looking in. And this is all the social and emotional intelligence arena. So this is all understanding what's happening inside of me. Because if I don't, and I turn off to that, guess what? Everything comes out sideways, right, David?
And that's where separation comes from too.
Like separation and all that is like, okay, now I can see as I go inward and I look inward, wow, I'm feeling some fear in this moment as I come into this room with these people. I'm feeling anxious or I'm angry. Why am I angry right now? So it's all of that, and then being able to work with that, the inner voice, the inner critic, the shadow, the feeling states, all of that social emotional intelligence that's inside of me. I have to get good at that. So I get good at looking out. I'm present. I'm more and more present. I'm looking in, and the looking in is really about the water, right? So, and it's the map so well because we think of water as emotionality, right? And flowing, and things change and shift with water. And so the water of my interior is always moving and shifting. So just being aware of what that is, again, has me be more effective in my interactions, more effective leader, because I'm able to modulate and work with what is coming up rather than reacting from it. Because if I'm unconscious to it or not looking at it or not attuned to it, I will react to it. And we all know those leaders that are just hair trigger, angry, and they're just not tapped into where is that coming from? Why am I feeling that? And then to work with that, to modulate that, because I can feel that fire come up and I can be, whoa, just take a breath. Take a breath. Okay, now I can come from a different place. And so that now is a really beautiful dynamic that's always at play, is looking out, looking in, looking out, looking in, and I can, play with that. And then the other 2 ones one is called choosing. You'll love this. And it's all the area in leadership around decision making. But I hate that. I hate decision making. The word is, it's really about a choice that I come up to based on whatever I feel, whatever the input is in the space, the collaboration, the feedback loops, is that then I have this place where I can then start to look at where is my choosing. And sometimes the choosing is not to do anything, right? Is not to choose. It's to
but
just
that is a choice.
It is a choice. And so the choosing is really the fire element, right? Because it does move us to action. It's the initiatory energy. It's the fire of our human beingness, which is as a leader at times, I need to make a choice. Or I still get the collective field and then we choose together, but I'm still part of that collective field of choosing. And this is really important because a lot of leaders tell me, and a lot of the books that I've read, is one of the biggest things that leaders talk about all the time is the quality of decision making, right? And some of them say, where does that come from? This gal's always making these decisions that are so awesome. Like, are they just winging it? But some of it is that combination of what's in the space and what is the feedback loop, and then what does my intuition and my own inner guide say too. They call that the gut instinct that so many leaders talk. Just trust in my gut, but it's more than that.
I think choice is an extremely important topic, and I've done whole sessions on choice.
Yes.
The one thing I believe is choice is really the only thing we actually possess.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing nobody can take away from us. We may think that there is no choice in this moment. Mm-hmm. All we're really thinking, in the truth, is the options that we have don't look very appealing. And so I feel like I only have this choice over here because the rest of them but there are always other options available.
Yeah,
I think that's a beautiful point. And so you're saying that you put choice in the fire element. And fire is about, I see fire as something that is molding, shaping, creating, and having a powerful impact or influence on the world around us.
Yeah, that's it. You're right on. And I love that you brought some color and flavor to what I'm saying. Is I agree with you. When I thought about this four practice model, this 4-directional model, that's exactly where I was coming with choices. That as human beings, ultimately, the way we co-create with the universe is through our choice. I mean, it's as simple as that. Even the idea of setting an intention is still part of the choice making, right?
Exactly.
So all this stuff is around that I at any moment can get fully present and choose to do anything. I'm going to walk forward now. I'm going to choose to change my whole life. I'm going to choose to go and start a master's program. I'm going to choose to just sit down here and just rest and be, so it's a constant process of choosing. And so if leaders are more attuned to the simplicity and the power of that, then the choosing doesn't get mixed in too much with the needs or the have-tos, like you said, or the ego, or I don't know, so I better find out, and I'm just going to make a choice because I don't want to look stupid. So all of that starts to get mixed in, which is all part of the human condition. But that if we come back to the simple quality of choosing and not saying I've got to create this, or this is the direction, or we have to build this and that's the choice or choosing, it's as simple as I'm going to stop and listen now. I'm going to listen to my team now. Those are the moments where I think leaders differentiate themselves. When you said that we've all had experiences of sort of the tyrant leaders or the fully inclusive collaborative leaders, I do believe that these practices that I'm talking about is helping to lead people more into that space of fully present, collaborative, inclusive, open, empowered, and empowering leader. All those words you can use. You can just keep layering on words. And so the choosing is a big, big part of that. And it has the fire of forming, the fire of forming, the fire of breaking down, the fire of all the way down to the ashes too. Our choices can take us all the way there. And sometimes that's what needs to happen, right? Rather than avoiding that.
Well, yeah. And the other thing that, I don't know if you've already encapsulated this, but the idea, not all choices are conscious or intentional choices.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of the choices that we make are automatic, autopilot, unconscious, and we don't even imagine the potential impact of our choices until we pause and reflect, which of course is the looking within, looking without piece that you were talking about.
That's the thing, is that starts to inform more healthy choices, because you're absolutely right. There's unconscious and conscious choices always moving, or we think it's a conscious choice, but it's being born out of a wound, right? Or born out of the darkness in this.
Out of a shadow, yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
So I'll finish. Yeah, so thank you. That's choice. So the last one of this 4-quadrant model, these 4 elements, or this leadership developmental model is being with. And that's air. That's air. And the being with is probably the most sort of, if you had to put an overlay of it, the most spiritual of them, you know what I mean? In the sense of, can I just be fully with and present to whatever is happening in the space? And here's the beauty of it. It's a double entendre. There's a quality of being with other. So being with my human brothers, being with nature, the beings, the sentient beings on the planet. So being with, but then it's also being with whatever is happening in the space.
Right. Right.
See, so often leaders want to control the space. So much of our command and control economy, command and control businesses is, I must control the space so that it's all safe and easy and getting us toward the profitability we want. When sometimes what's just being within the space looks messy, chaotic, frustrating, and that's sometimes where innovation and creativity and possibility arises from. So as a leader, can I be with whatever is going on in the space and be doing my looking in and looking out practice, and then not trying to over control it or over structure it, so that then there's a limit. Then you're creating limits and structures that don't serve the whole for it to come out. And so if I'm being with, it's really more, I started with a little bit talking about presence in the earth, but this is really more of where you really open your presence as a human being to what's happening in the space.
Beautiful. I love it. I think it's simple enough that people can understand it. I think that it's encompassing enough to be a full model, a nice, easy model to remember. And what's interesting to me is, you know about my model. I have the archetypal model. In which, by the way, I have brought in those 4 elements as well into the archetypal model, because they do fit. So it's interesting that there's a correspondence here between our 2 models, which aren't exactly the same, but they're very similar. And of course, those are things that you talk about, I talk about too. It's amazing.
Yeah, and
Ricky's comments here.
Right.
Thank you, Ricky, for writing. I appreciate it. I'm sorry we didn't get to you right away during the flow, but Chris was just going there, and I was just enjoying what he was saying, so I didn't want to interrupt that. But I see a couple of great points in here. I believe coaching helps people to get clear first on who they are and what is their purpose, which of course is important for helping them to move into leadership, as we've been discussing. And I think also the right questions is a critical thing too. This is the beauty of a coach, I think, Chris. Do you agree with that? When I as a coach, I don't try and tell people anything. Sure, I want to teach them. I want them to understand the stuff that I have learned, but I try to get them to bring the wisdom out from themselves by hopefully asking the question that brings that wisdom out of them. Yes. And I think that's a powerful piece.
And just to add to that, I like what you're saying here, Ricky. The quality of questions we ask is vital. Here's the thing: it's the quality of the questions we ask ourselves, which is important, and that others ask of the other. So that's a coach asking or a mentor asking of someone else. And so they're both important, because as we ask our own questions, much like Goethe said, is that it's important to live inside the questions too. Sometimes to live inside the question means not to answer it right away, not to reflexively and reactively just jump into some solution or some answer. So sometimes the questions can work us. Sometimes the questions can actually give some sort of juice to what we're working on without having to solve it. So it could be like, what's the quality of, great question, of a kind of a spiritual question to ask somebody. If I'm thinking about one part of my model, the model that's talking about being with, is what's the quality of your presence? It's a question mark. What's the quality of your presence right now? What do you think the quality of your presence in general is? What's the quality of your presence when you're working with a client, or more so maybe when your whole team, if you've got a team of people, are gathered? And we may actually have different answers or feeling states to those kinds of questions that are move us. And then the biggest question Dave and I have talked about a long time is, what's your purpose, right? So, and that can again be a question that doesn't have to be done right now. It can be unfolding over an exploration of time.
Right.
So yeah, to live inside those questions and to ask the questions of ourselves and of others is very vital and very important. It's what stimulates the possibilities.
You know, one of the things that you said early on that I just wanted to bring back, you said that you didn't think the word leadership was necessarily the best word to describe this quality. One word that I chose in my personal mission statement was the word modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So my mission statement is I create universal harmony by modeling, fostering, and facilitating authentic magnificence. The modeling part to me is how I choose to show up so that I can hopefully get other people to show up in that way as well. Mm-hmm. To me, that is leadership right there. Although it doesn't use the word leadership.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, modeling this idea of being, even the Gandhi quote, being the change you want to see in the world, modeling, being what you aspire to want to see happening in the world is absolutely a form of leadership, but you don't have to necessarily call it that. You can call it modeling. You can call it I'm being more of me. The authentic me is showing up. But like even what Ricky said is that like to get these ideas across the average person in today's changing society is sometimes tough. So this is the transcend and include conversation, David, again, is that we're still in a conversation of leadership and what does that mean? And a lot of people wanting to figure out what that means, right? And then how do I become a better leader with my team and the people in my company, my organization? So it's still the lens we're looking through. But I think ultimately what most even corporate coaches, executive coaches, consultants realize is leadership development and personal development is almost the same thing. It's just done inside a company, right? Yeah. So this idea of leadership development.
Gandhi, and I just wanted to come back to that.
Yeah.
I mean, Gandhi, David Hawkins, in his book, Power versus Force, talks about, the difference between just being in power and using force to try and control people.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I thought this was a beautiful metaphor that he created. He said, he may not have said these words exactly, but this is my interpretation. Gandhi represents force. Hitler represents power. I'm sorry, I got them backwards.
Backwards.
Gandhi represents power. Hitler represents force. Right. That was a mental brain fart.
That was weird. Yeah.
But and I thought about this and I said, that makes perfect sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because the power always seems to overcome the force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is a beautiful thing. I mean, Gandhi was able to bring down almost the entire British Empire simply with non-violent protests.
Yes.
By standing in his power, in the belief that what he was doing was true and it was good for the whole country and the whole world.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I think that the challenge with our culture today is still also redefining power. So meaning even as you say that simply, it's like you're giving a model of what's authentic power, conscious power, the new kind of power, which is more modeled by Gandhi. But we still live in a culture where there's confusion about what does power mean, not even force, what is power. And so I think that's part of what, I'm pointing to around leadership and developing leaders to be, fully present, engaged, collaborative, inclusive leaders. Here's the thing is they've got to be having a new, and this is something I've been thinking about in the model that I've been sharing with you, is how to have a conversation, a self-conversation, but also a collective conversation around power. Your point, like really what does that mean to say I'm a powerful man or I'm a powerful woman or a powerful transgender person, whatever. What is it that I am speaking to? And maybe I'd love to get your take on that. What do you think is sort of the new definition for you or the new way of holding or thinking about power? Because that goes right in hand with leadership. Absolutely. I'm a leader in some way, and there's some aspect of power that I can bring because I am this leader. And there is positional power That's just given to me by being the president of the United States, positional power. And then there's authentic natural power. Right. But those are just two pieces. How do you hold it, David? How do you hold power?
Well, the way I see it personally, power is something that we all have access to through our spiritual connection to all that is. That is my perspective. Power is just there. It is infinite. It does not go away. Mm-hmm. That is my understanding. Force, on the other hand, is what I engage in when I'm letting my ego mind run the show. When I'm trying to control you, when I'm trying to get the situation to work on my behalf to satisfy my ego needs, that's when force comes into play. Because now I want to take away stuff from you. I want to prevent you from stopping me from getting what I want. That is how I see the difference. And in reality, if you look at it, even on a grand scale, you can see this playing out all over the world. People in our own culture, right here in the United States, the ego fights that are going on just in the news on a daily basis happen. In fact, not just daily. Every moment we can see another example of it. This is not power at all. This is force that's happening. Yeah. And so that's how I see it. That's how I hold it. And what I try to do for myself is and we're going to get into this topic right now, this awareness of shadow. I try to be aware when my ego is starting to run amok. And I try to catch myself and say, oh shit, there I go again. That ego mind has decided that it's going to start running its show, and I forget who I really am when that happens. I need to literally stop what I'm doing. And just say, okay, be gentle with myself, first of all, because I have an ego just like every other human being on the planet does. And then I just rein it in. I say, okay, I understand you're upset about something. Let's see if we can get down to the truth of what that is. Let's heal that wound so that you're not bringing that out and creating all kinds of havoc and chaos in the world. That's what I try to do. Yeah. And I think, I know you do this work too. So let's talk a little bit about awareness of shadow and ego and all the stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, and especially through the lens of my own development, through the lens of me being a more empowered person in the world and being a leader in whatever arena I choose. Yeah, this for me, this goes to that clearing out of the inner landscape. There we are back to the natural world, clearing out the inner landscape so there isn't so many knives and edges and maces and swords and, guns and, whatever inside me that are either pointed back at me or pointed out and creating damage and creating lots of damage. So it's an awareness. So the shadow arena, and that's just one word, right? For working with the interior, the wound work, the shadow work, the child, inner child, inner critic, right? We have all these words, right? Lots of processes and lots of ways of looking at what is in here that I am not willing to look at or have been unwilling to look at. And now I come into, this is my looking in process again, is that I've got to be able to look inward and then see what is there that is not true about me. And that's a lot about, you wrote this in your book, and it's awesome, is it's really starting to see that I create these stories and these messages. I have these weapons inside of me that aren't really me, that somehow they've been developed over my own wounding of my life and the wounding that's happened to me, or whatever challenges that I've faced that have either been an opportunity for me to grow or have created some beliefs, some shadow beliefs or behaviors. So I see that as so critical. You and I do this work, I'm doing this work for a long time. And if I were to just put it back in the lens of leadership, is we need to do that inner work to be more effective out in the world, to have more authentic power, is what you're saying. More true power, not force, starts with cleaning out the closet, cleaning out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to be like, oh my God. And this is what Lion Goodman, a dear friend, he has this whole belief closet. He talks about the belief closet, clear your beliefs. And it's going into that closet, all that place, that dark spot, open the door, and what needs to be removed, taken out, looked at, investigated, but let go of, basically, given out and back into the world.
Yeah, I talk about this too, the whole idea of reviewing beliefs every now and then. Because I believe, look at that, isn't that interesting? I use the word I believe to talk about beliefs. I believe that every belief is a limiting belief. Because the moment I start to believe something, I immediately create the space for my ego mind to disbelieve everything that isn't part of that belief. And so we end up creating this separation, this division as a result of a belief.
Yeah.
Now, so every belief is a limiting belief, including the belief that everything is a limiting belief.
Right. That's what that starts to bake your brain. Right.
Yeah. So the key, I think, in that process is just to simply notice, what is it that I believe? The other thing that happens, I think, is when I create a belief, then my ego mind starts acting out and looks for evidence to support that belief and looks for ways of, of justifying not believing the not belief. You know what I'm saying? I know that's a mouthful, but you get my point. So this whole concept of beliefs, which are often fueled by our old childhood wounds, needs to be much more greatly expanded. And I think, as you've been saying, the natural leader, the true authentic leader, does that work, does look within, does uncover those old wounds and find a way to heal them so that you can integrate those parts of yourself back into yourself and really benefit from whatever energy those shadows are trying to express.
Yeah, and even more so that says even doubling down to say, as a leader in my own life and as a leader potentially out in the world, I must do that. Like, I mean, I hate to be that strong, but it's like almost a requirement of our evolution and our growth to be looking at what is in the way of me inhabiting my true nature, my most magnificent self, right?
Exactly.
So that, but then that doesn't mean there's no ego in that. It's just my full authentic presence. What gets in the way of that? Because when I'm in that place, there's more possibility and more magic and more that, can possibly emerge if I'm moving out of those belief structures. And like you said, every belief's a limiting belief, but there is a quality where I then get more and more and more present, where there very little beliefs are actually showing up. And it's more of moving into presence, holding, choosing, okay, what's here, what's next, what's here, what's next. And it's so much harder to do when there's so much more baggage and old stuff that's in the way of that. So I feel like somebody holding themselves is really wanting to see the kind of change or shift in the world that they want to see or being part of that. It's really critical that somebody's willing to do that kind of work. And that's hard. And it's hard for people to say, it's hard for people out in the world today with all of that we have, the entertainment, the distraction, all that, to say, I'm going to spend significant time to do that. And I see more and more people willing to do that, but it's still a small percentage of people that are willing to go through that, David. And I really want to see more and more people.
I totally agree with you. And what I think is even a more maybe pernicious problem in this area is that a lot of people recognize that they have these challenges, these beliefs, these shadows, and look to some kind of spiritual bypass in order to avoid going into that place and healing those old wounds. And then maybe sitting and meditating on a rock for years and imagining that somehow eliminates the shadow. Well, there may be one or two people on the planet who are able to do that. But I think most of us, we have to deal with the wounds directly. We cannot bypass them.
Right.
But the more we bypass them, the more we're just creating a kind of a denial about the existence of the problem. And we're avoiding them. And the thing is, they will continue to come up and show up in our lives until we have the courage to go in and look at them and heal them once and for all.
Yeah, and that's really well said, David. I think it's really important that as I look at my own life, that I'm doing both I'm willing to do the descending journey, the journey down into my heart and my gut and my wounds. And then as I begin to be more facile with that, as I loosen those more and more, there is also then more space to do more of the ascending journey, more of that bigger holding space.
Correct.
The wound is less impactful now. I catch it really quickly, or the shadows are not having the same impact as they used to early in my life. And so what happens is I begin to do both the dance of that the wound work is important work to do, but as I move progressively on that path, more and more of my time is now more in service to other, right? Service to the whole, and less of the time and energy, because we can also go into wound worship, right? So there's the other side of it.
Yeah, that's just another shadow, isn't it?
Exactly. There's the spiritual bypassing, I totally get, and then there's the wound worship, the kind of emotional connection to, oh, it's so juicy, and I'm going to go deeper in the next layer, and there's something else here, and all that, and then that keeps us in what I'd call a narcissistic loop. So that is, and somebody thinks they're doing their deep work, and I would say, well, take a real look there. If you're staying in there, there's kind of some narcissism around it. And so how can you loosen that to then get back to what's out in the world? What's the purpose that I want to bring? How do I come together with others to create positive change that we want to see? So that's where the trap is on both sides of that spiritual bypassing, and then the wounds are still playing out, or I'm wound worshiping and just all in my kind of just in my stuff, and I'm not actually bringing myself fully. You know, this would be a Gandhi thing. I don't know how much time Gandhi spent doing his wound work, but you know, I'm sure he did some of it. But then he was really there to serve others. What needs to happen now in the space here in India or South Africa or wherever, and we need more people willing to be in service, right?
Yeah, so exactly.
Doing their work.
I want to say one more thing about this whole shadow piece. I don't recommend that people do this work on their own. I think that if you've never done any of this work before, I strongly encourage you to find someone who is skilled and adept at helping you to get into your shadows in such a way that you will gain the most out of it and come back and not be stuck in that old wound. Mm-hmm. It's very important to learn that. And so there are practitioners. I do it. Chris does it. There's a lot of other people who do that work. But I strongly encourage you to find someone to help you with that, because then once you learn the tools, then you can begin to do a little bit of that work on your own, and eventually get to the place where it's easier, not necessarily easy, but easier to do that work and to know that you're going to come out of it with a positive, uplifting, encouraging, and motivating experience, something that you can bring into the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it's just simply hard to see on your own sometimes, right, David? You know?
That's right.
So doing it with others is having an experienced guide, but also somebody that can point towards something that you just can't see because it's in a blind spot. It's in shadow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, we've talked enough about shadow. I want to just kind of wrap up this discussion and talk a little bit about cultivating this practice. Now, you've shared us a little bit about your four quadrant map. Can you help us with maybe a daily practice that we can do to kind of bring more of our natural leadership into the world?
Yeah. Well, certainly. I mean, a fundamental practice in whatever discipline, tradition, whatever you come from, is some kind of meditative or solo on your own practice, whatever that is, and that can be a form of prayer or meditation. But you know this, David, and maybe I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here, but my belief is that everybody needs a practice where they go inward and are silent and quiet. It's a resting practice. It's a stillness practice. And that can be anywhere. It could be sitting on a bench out in a park, or it could be on a cushion in your room. But fundamental to our development and as human beings is knowing that sometimes we're in movement, and sometimes it helps to know what it's like to feel like to be in stillness and to be in quiet and to go in. So that's form, number one, whatever that is for you. Mine's a daily or twice daily meditation practice, and then I use that to really ground me and bring me back to myself. Because sometimes in my busy day, I can feel I'm living here and out, like it's literally up. My energy is all out, and how do I bring it all the way back in? And then the other one I would just say quickly for each of the quadrants is the looking out practice is spend a little bit of time, maybe each week, doesn't have to be every day, but each week out in nature, and just allow yourself to come to like a sit spot, sitting on a bench or on the ground or on a rock overlooking something, whatever it is, and be in nature, but in stillness or sitting. And then you can also use it where you're also in movement. So you're doing the walk and you're staying present, you're looking at your environment around you, or the sit spots allows you to really start to feel into the whole space because you're not even moving. That really helps to practice what I call presence with space. Where you're really seeing what's happening, noticing the birds and the leaves and the wind and the trees, all that, and the grass growing. So that's one there. And then I would say, and I'll just end with this, on the inner practices, basically what we've been offering here is to look at what's in the space internal, a practice of either in a group setting or with a therapist or coach, or possibly on your own, is to really understand what is the kind of the emotional train that you run, the patterns that you run, the wound or the shadow work. I think that's an important, even a weekly practice as well, if not a daily practice, to just know what's happening in the space. And then work on this idea that you are not your beliefs or your story, right? That's a daily practice of noticing and watching your thought pattern and seeing what that is. One thing I've done in the past, doesn't have to be an every day or weekly, but it could be over like 3 weeks, is to journal every day what thoughts, just throughout the day, what significant thoughts keep coming up or what you notice, and then track that over 2 or 3 weeks. And you might see a pattern that's kind of disturbing and distressing, like these 4 thoughts, right, David? However, we could think about anything. The world is so beautiful and big and amazing. And I might have the 4 same thoughts all the time, And so how do I then unhook from these 4 thought patterns? And so doing that as a practice over a period of time can help you be more aware of where you keep getting into a loop. Yeah,
that's great, Chris. And I know we could be talking about this for hours on end. You and I, we just we vibe it out, man. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
And we've already reached the end of our time.
Yes,
I just want to thank you so much for being here today. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show again. And I know that we're gonna do it again sometime in the future. Maybe we'll find another way to collaborate. Who knows? But anyway, to all of you who are watching the recording, I just want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being a part of my tribe and learning with me and helping all of us to grow and become better life masters and maybe better leaders in our life. Remember that all recordings of all the shows I've ever done are on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. It's a growing library. There's lots of great stuff there. I hope you'll grab yourself a free account and watch some of those recordings. In a few hours, you're going to receive a link, an email that is, with a link to a feedback page. Please take a few minutes to write us a heartfelt, authentic 5-star, 5-star review. I'd love it. It helps to increase the spread of the story of this Life Mastery TV, and it helps to bring other people to come and watch as well. Finally, I just want to remind you about the Life Mastery Mantra. This is something that goes along with the idea of being a powerful, authentic servant leader. But to just go into this on a regular basis, the Life Mastery Mantra. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. Until we meet again, I'm David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you light, love, and blessings on your continuing journey. Bye-bye for now.
See you, everyone. Thank you.